Hey, everybody, and welcome to the live stream from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name's Simon Williams, and today we are doing our Monday night book study. Let me just get a little bit better situated here. So, I hope everybody's been having a great week and a great time in their lives, and that you are out there pursuing these conversations that are helpful to human flourishing and human welfare. Making sure that you are engaging in the conversations well. Especially you Christians who are being ambassadors for the kingdom of God. So, as usual, for every week, we talk about tactics. We're reading through tactics. We're up to chapter 15. This one is called Rhodes Scholar, and we're going to be talking about whether or not the person that you're talking with is informing you or educating you. And Greg Koukl is going to be letting us know what that looks like. All right, so let's see here. All right, well, let's talk about who Greg Koukl is real quick. This is Greg Koukl. He runs a ministry called Stand to Reason. Very good ministry. I highly recommend checking it out. You can get the book that we're reading online at Amazon.com and at ChristianBooks.com. Just as a reminder, I do not always update these pictures, so the prices may not be accurate. I definitely recommend getting this book so that you can follow along and read with us and highlight and make the book your own. Reference it yourself and study it yourself in your leisure time and study time. Don't forget to subscribe. This is YouTube. I'm trying to get this information out to as many people as possible. And you can help me in this goal by just liking the content or making a comment or sharing it with your friends and family. Very much appreciated. We want to make sure that God's people have all the resources that they can and make it as convenient as possible for us. And this time I am remembering to turn that off, so the next time we come up on the screen, it should not pop up. I put out a little I posted on Facebook and here on YouTube a little news anchor kind of video informing you guys about stuff that's going on with Northeast Christian Apologetics as well as Apologetics Abroad. But we're not going to be meeting at the church this week in New London. We're going to be meeting next Wednesday instead of this Wednesday. So just in case you didn't get that information. But a normal time on Saturday at Castle Church in Norwich, we're going to be talking about objections to Christianity, talking about responding to claims saying that it's homophobic, racist, sexist, things of that nature. Should be a good conversation. Pastor Adam Bowles will be there as well, and he'll be able to have conversations with us on that. But like I said, I hope you guys are having a great night, and that's about it. Let's go ahead and jump over to the book. Oh, and just a reminder, this channel or this book study is kind of like, you gotta remember that's kind of like a react kind of channel where instead of us reacting to like videos and music and things of that nature, we're reacting to books. So I'm going to be presenting you with my opinions on the matter, and I'm going to be providing my insights and answering questions. And if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to provide them in the chat, and we'll have a conversation about it. Last week we had really good interaction. Really appreciate you guys doing that. I'm just going to say hi in the chat myself. Hi, everyone. All right, so let's jump over to our book. Kapow. All right, so chapter 15, Rhodes Scholar. All right, so Greg Koukl says, if you read magazines like Time or Newsweek, you might have noticed a trend. Just before Easter and Christmas, these publications often feature cover stories about the history behind these two central events on the Christian calendar. The articles have provocative titles like What Really Happened to the Body of Jesus or The Untold Truth About the First Christmas. Generally, the authors take a what scholars say that your pastor does not want you to know approach. They cite academics who use a scientific approach to history to expose the false notions held by the foolish faithful. Informed or educated. Cover stories like these sell lots of magazines. They also discourage lots of Christians. Some wonder why these academic facts have been kept from them. Others don't know what to believe. They don't want to abandon their convictions, but they cannot in good conscience dismiss what appears to be the consensus of academic opinion, simply because they don't like what they hear. In situations like these, a tactic I called Rhodes Scholar is invaluable. It provides a way of assessing whether an appeal to an authority is legitimate or not. The tactic hinges on the difference between informed and educated. When an article tells you what a scholar believes, you have been informed. When an article tells you why he holds his view, you have been educated. All right, so you've been informed if you are told what he believes, but you are educated when you are told why he believes it. So this is kind of going back to, and this is a common theme throughout this book, is the Columbo tactic. So what scholars believe is kind of like, what do you mean by that? And you're trying to understand better what the person believes. And then why the scholar holds this view is like, why do you believe what you believe? And so when you ask, what do you mean by that? You're gaining information about the person who you're talking to. And then when you ask why, you're being educated on why they believe what they believe. All right. So here is why this distinction is so important. Or Koukl continues. If you recall from chapter 5, an argument is like a house whose roof, what a person believes, is supported by walls, the reasons why he believes. You cannot know if the reasons are adequate to the conclusion if the walls are strong enough to hold the roof unless you know what those reasons are. If you know the reasons, you can assess their strength. Without them, you have no way of knowing if the conclusions are sound. Popular articles always inform, but they do not always educate. As a result, you can't evaluate a scholar's conclusion. You simply have to take his word for it. But scholars can be wrong and often are. Their reasoning can be weak, their facts can be mistaken, and their biases can distort their judgment. Assessing the academics. How do you find out if an authority has been compromised? Here's how. Regardless of a scholar's credentials, don't settle for opinions. Instead, always ask for reasons. This is the key to Rhodes Scholar. This tactic protects you from being victimized by a common error called the fallacy of expert witness. There is nothing wrong with appealing to authority, but it must be done in the right way. You must ask, why should I believe this person's opinion? There are two ways to answer this question. First, the scholar may be in a special position to know the facts. However, if an authority is in possession of special information that guides his counsel, then he should be able to point to that evidence to convince us he's on the mark. Sometimes authorities give opinions that are outside of their area of expertise, though. When California passed its controversial embryonic stem cell research initiative, 20 Nobel laureates backed the measure. Only 4 were listed by name and discipline. I looked carefully at their comments. One, a professor of biology and physiology, assured voters that the measure was ethical. Another, a specialist in cancer research, said the legislation would boost California's economy and have a salutary impact on healthcare costs. An Alzheimer's research director promised new jobs and increased revenues for state coffers. As I scanned the comments and credentials, it occurred to me that a Nobel Prize in biology, chemistry, or medicine does not qualify a person to render sound counsel on economics or ethics. To appeal by these scholars then missed the mark because the principal objection to embryonic stem cell research are moral, not scientific or ethical. So having 20 Nobel Prize winners on one side may awe voters, but the fact alone does not legitimize the cause. You and I need more information before we can trust their endorsements. Even when scholars speak within their field of expertise, they still owe us an accounting based on sound reasons. In a court of law, the expert witness is always cross-examined. Credentials alone are not enough to certify his testimony. He must convince a jury that his reasons are adequate. All appeals to authority ultimately rest on the evidence that the authority has. Norm Geisler says, the letters after his name don't mean a thing without the evidence to back up his position. There's a second way the Rhodes Scholar query, why should I believe this person's opinion, can be answered. Sometimes a scholar is in a unique position to render a judgment. More than mere facts are in play here. The interpretation and professional assessment are factors. In this circumstance, you face another pitfall. A scholar's judgment may be distorted by underlying philosophical considerations that are not always on the table. Note this critique of pluralist John Hick's selective use of scholarship. Hicks seems intent on deciding questions of great spiritual significance by counting scholarly noses, without reminding readers that many of these scholars presuppose a picture of the world that excludes the possibility of divine intervention in the world. The point philosopher Douglas Grivet makes here is that sometimes one's destination is predetermined by where one starts. If a scholar begins an investigation convinced that miracles cannot happen, it will be difficult for him to conclude that something supernatural has taken place, even when there's overwhelming evidence in favor of it. And this point of view often comes up when you're talking about the resurrection of Jesus. There are many people out there who insist that biblical scholarship must be done in the backdrop of a either a naturalistic worldview or taking on what's called a methodological naturalism, where you take on naturalism as a methodology. And so if you presuppose on the outset that there is no supernatural aspect of reality, then it's going to be hard to argue for a resurrection, because a resurrection is widely considered to require a supernatural causal entity, or at least an entity with supernatural causal powers. So if you exclude that right off the bat, then you're not really taking the account seriously, because the account is of supernatural quality. So you can't on the outset say that supernatural things cannot exist and then say, oh, the resurrection cannot be a act of God because the supernatural doesn't exist. It's circular reasoning. All right, so the point let's see here. Where are we at? Overwhelming evidence in favor of it. This problem is especially evident in science, where subjects like the origin of the universe, cosmology, or the origin and development of life, Darwinism, have worldview implications. The temptation is great to simply count scholarly noses without taking into consideration the powerful philosophical paradigm that dictates what kinds of conclusions are acceptable. Yeah. Your worldview shapes how you interpret evidence. So that's why I emphasize so much with the groups that I teach to do worldview analysis. It's a two-way street also. Like, you're supposed to keep an open mind about these kinds of things and consider evidences in light of your worldview, but also consider your worldview in light of the evidence. All right. So it's difficult, but this is why we need to have open dialogue with as many people as you can. All right. This is why you need to have open dialogue with as many people as you can, both in-house, like with other Christians, but also outside of your Christian circle. You don't want to become so siloed that you aren't able to talk to other people. You can definitely get worldview blindness, even though I personally believe that Christianity has the widest scope of explanatory power. It has the widest explanatory scope of any worldview out there, in my opinion. All right, so Koukl continues. Two faces of science. Whenever you hear the complaint, intelligent design is not science, A subtle philosophical sleight of hand is in play. The charge capitalizes on an ambiguity between two different definitions of science. The first definition is the most well-known. Science is a methodology, employing various tools like observation, experimentation, testing, and the like, that allows researchers to discover facts about the physical world. Thus, any view that is not based on the right methodology is not a scientific view. The second definition of science involves a philosophy, specifically the philosophy of naturalistic materialism. All phenomena must be explained in terms of matter and energy governed by natural law. Any view that does not conform to the second definition is also not science. You'll also often find people saying that science is done with regard to with regard to phenomena, that there's nothing other than natural causal entities with natural causal powers. Okay, so this is an assumption that many people make in order to do science, and it's an unjustified assumption. All right, so there are two requirements then for an investigation of the natural world to qualify as science. According to current standards, first, one must use the right method, the scientific method. Second, one must come up with the right kinds of answers, those consistent with a naturalistic, physicalist, materialistic world or view of the world. Usually, these two requirements are not in conflict. Good methods produce answers in accord with matter in motion governed by natural laws. Sometimes, though, the evidence points in a different direction. The origin of life, for example, and the incredible biological diversity of the living world consistently defy any naturalistic explanation. Instead, powerful and persuasive empirical evidence points to design. This creates a problem for naturalists that is solved by trading on the ambiguity between the two definitions. The intelligent design is not science charge appears at first to be directed at the methodology. Presumably, the reason evolution does qualify as a scientific enterprise and intelligent design doesn't is that Darwinists use the right methods and ID researchers do not. The facts of science inveigh against the faith of intelligent design. Thus, the assumption is intelligent design is no more science than astrology is. And I don't remember Koukl mentioning exactly what intelligent design is. So intelligent design is the idea that God directly was involved with the creation of life. So life is designed by an intelligent agent with the power to create life. And it's usually thought that the intelligent designer cannot be himself a creature that's like a creature that it came about by the natural processes through natural laws. So usually it's a supernatural entity. And for most intelligent design people, it's God, the God of the Christian Bible. All right, so this claim is a colossal distortion of the actual situation, though. First, a mountain of factual data has emerged in the last 20 years, casting serious doubt on the entire Darwinian project, in spite of the clear suppression of such information by the larger academic community. Second, ID researchers follow the exact same broad methodology as Darwinists, so their work is no less scientific in that sense than any other scientific pursuit. The real problem for naturalists is that ID researchers infer different conclusions from the same scientific evidence. Enter the sleight of hand. When there is a conflict between the findings of the scientific method and the requirements of materialistic philosophy, the philosophy always trumps the findings. Modern science does not conclude from the evidence that design is not tenable. It assumes this prior to the evidence. Any scientific methodology, first definition of science, that points to intelligent design is summarily disqualified by scientific philosophy. Second definition of science, as religion disguised as science. At first blush, it seems as if Darwinism is about scientific facts, but when facts suggest intelligent design, the second definition of science is immediately invoked to label design as unscientific. Yeah, so you need to be careful in this regard. You gotta ask questions like, why is it that you think that the methodology of science is limited to naturalistic or a materialistic like worlds? A science itself was born, and I've been saying this recently at Castle Church in Norwich, but science was born out of a Christian worldview. You know, the fathers of the modern scientific method were Christians, and they worshiped a God of order, not chaos. This is their view. If they worship a God of order and not chaos, and that if I am an inhabitant of a world created by this God of order, then I would expect to see order and regularity and coherence in the world around me. And if I do experiments testing this world that I inhabit, then I would expect to see similar results for the same conclusions, and the same initial conditions. If the conditions are the same, then the results should be consistent. And that's what they found. And this is also a thing that needs to be understood with regard to not just science, but anything. When as science progressed and gained popularity, and also the modern scientific method was seen to be a very powerful instrument for progressing human knowledge. A lot of people joined the scientific endeavor without these kind of fundamental beliefs about reality, how the order is explained by a divine creator. Instead, they assumed the order without justification. And that's why they believed that you could do these things without an appeal to God. So you can do science because the regularity is there, and you don't need to have the belief that God is there in order for the regularity, to believe in the regularity and the uniformity. But your belief in God is irrelevant. You know, what needs to be explained is that regularity. The regularity and the uniformity needs to be explained, and that's where God comes in. On naturalism and materialism and things like that, it's not explained. It's just assumed. So science did away with God without justification. All right. So when you hear people saying that science takes on a methodological naturalism, that's actually not true. Science only really works on like a Christian worldview or a Muslim worldview or things like that. There needs to be some sort of regulating creative sustainer in order to explain the uniformity. Okay. So Koukl continues, Douglas Futuyma, author of a classic college evolutionary biology textbook, says where science insists on material, mechanistic causes that can be understood by physics and chemistry, the literal believer in Genesis invokes unknowable supernatural forces. Those who believe in intelligent design, however, claim that these forces are knowable, at least in principle. Consider this analogy. When a dead body is discovered, an impartial investigation might indicate foul play and not an accident. If the body is bullet-ridden, chances are the death was not a result of natural causes. In the same way, scientific evidence could, in principle, indicate an agent in creation rather than chance. This is not faith versus evidence, but evidence versus consensus. And where this really comes into play, especially with regard to biology and intelligent design and stuff like that and evolution, is this idea of specified complexity. If we see instances of complexity that have specific purposes, then this is evidence of a designer. This is evidence of a designer. And when you look at biology, you look at organs that have specific purposes and they're very complex. And even when you get down to the cell, you see parts of the cell These parts have specific purposes, and they're incredibly complex, ridiculously complex. And this complexity is claimed by the intelligent design community to be better explained by a designer, rather than random chance over a long period of time. All right, so clearly, Koukl continues, clearly the materialist paradigm is paramount and everything must be done to save it. Harvard genetics professor Richard Lewontin was amazingly candid about this fact. In the New Yorker Review of Books, he made this stunning admission. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation for the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, excuse me, let me silence this. Sorry about that. All right, so, but on the contrary, where am I? But on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Now, I've literally heard atheists online say these things. You cannot allow a divine foot in the door. And they say it for different reasons. So like if you are starting off with a materialistic worldview, then and you assume it, then you are only going to interpret the evidence in light of that worldview. Now with a Christian worldview, however, with a Christian worldview, you can still say that there are natural causal entities with natural causal powers. That is perfectly within your worldview. So when we look at the evidence, we're able to say, oh yeah, this event occurred because there was a natural causal entity with natural causal powers. All right. But we also, when we come to a situation in which the evidence is like, wow, this doesn't really match easily or well with an entity with a natural entity with natural causal powers, we have available to us non-natural entities and non-natural causal powers. And so we have a wider scope of explanatory power. We are not limited to only material causes. We can incorporate those into a worldview and learn from them and use them for most situations when they're suitable. But when they are unsuitable, we can move on from them. We don't have to make them fit. So that's one power of the Christian worldview. You have a much more explanatory scope. There are no explanations available to the naturalist that isn't equally compatible with a Christian worldview, as long as it has sufficient evidence for support. Some people will say that Christians are worried about the investigation of neuroscience and discovering how the brain works and whether or not that's going to destroy our belief in the soul and things of that nature. That's not true at all. Christians, any evidence or any data that we obtain through neuroscience is perfectly compatible with the Christian worldview. We can rest easy knowing that God created the world in which we should expect our bodies to match our spiritual situation. So yes, there are brain states, and that and those brain states are a result of natural causal powers through natural causal entities when you're talking about the mechanics within the brain. But that doesn't do anything about saying that, brain states are the exact same as mental states, or that brain states just or that there are no mental states. That's unfounded. We can say that there are mental states as well as brain states. All right. So, but there's a lot more to all this. But we'll continue with what Koukl is talking about here. All right. So, and there's more to be said about the divine foot in the door. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, one more thing about the divine foot in the door. All right, so some people you're going to meet will say that the divine foot in the door, when you talk about like historical evidences, and I mentioned earlier talking about the resurrection of Jesus, when you are talking with people online about the resurrection of Jesus, a lot of them will say that biblical studies or history can only be done in the backdrop of materialism or methodological naturalism. Hi, Sasha. Thank you for checking in. They'll say because if you allow God in the door, and then how do you distinguish between supernatural narratives or supernatural claims from one religion versus another religion? And so that makes it. It makes it become more difficult for people doing these kinds of studies to determine what really happened. But if you can exclude the supernatural, that somehow makes it easier because everyone's lying. But when you do let the supernatural in the door, there are other ways in which you can distinguish how. What kind of supernatural causal powers are involved, but that deals directly with how strongly you are attuned to the spiritual side. People often neglect the aspect that humans have multiple parts. Hi, Mighty Vina. Hi, Mighty Vina. How's it going? Forgot to check in. Anyway, so people often neglect the reality that humans are spiritual creatures. But we are also physical creatures. Okay, so your ability to distinguish the spiritual causal entities is related to your ability to sense it. So, and that's been greatly damaged by the fall. So a lot of this has to do with the rejuvenating power of the Holy Spirit and also exercising spiritual disciplines. Okay. So when atheists say that it's difficult for them to distinguish between like spiritual causal entities or spiritual things, that's 100% true. Yes, it is difficult for them. A lot of these things are spiritually discerned, and the only way that Christians are able to discern them is because of their relationship to God. Okay? So if you do not have a strong relationship with God, then you will not be able to discern these things very well at all. Or so you need to make sure that you're in alignment. All right, so Koukl continues, most who hold this prejudice are not so candid. The majority, confident that their convictions rest on scientific fact, not materialistic philosophy, are not even aware of any problem. That is so true. They show their hand, however, that telltale responses like intelligent design is not science, or intelligent design is religion disguised as science. These comments should always trigger questions. What specifically disqualifies intelligent design as science? Or why dismiss the idea of design before you look at the evidence? Invariably, your Rhodes Scholar probing will reveal the real reason behind the rejection. Bias, not fact. Intelligent design of any sort is not the right kind of answer. All right, so the historical Jesus. Science is not the only field where the game has been rigged. In the beginning of the chapter, I mentioned that this approach has also been applied to the Gospels. Whenever someone uses the word scientific to describe the way they look at history, they're signaling that materialistic philosophy governs the process. Oh, by the way, the mighty Vidu, I can't believe you're here. I didn't expect you to be here. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Hope it was a great one, man. Hope it was a great one. I hope you had delicious food. All right. Anyway, sorry about that. All right. Koukl continues. Scholars from this school tried to distinguish the Jesus of history from the miracle-working Jesus of faith. They assume, of course, that there is a difference between the two. Why make this distinction? In academics, everyone has a starting point. The place where many scholars begin is not always clear to the public, but it's critical to understanding and evaluating their conclusions. Magazine stories about Easter are quick to point out that most scholars reject the resurrection. But why do they reject it? A closer examination reveals that their starting point. In a materialistic view of the universe, resurrections do not happen. Therefore, any report of a corpse walking out of a tomb after 3 days must be a myth, added to the records years later, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. The late Robert Funk, formerly of a group of liberal biblical scholars known as the Jesus Seminar, made this clear. The Gospels are now assumed to be narratives in which the memory of Jesus is embellished by mythic elements that express the church's faith in him, and by plausible fictions that enhance the telling of the gospel story for first-century listeners. The reasoning often goes something like this. The Gospels contain fabrications because they record events that are inconsistent with scientific, materialistic view of the world. Resurrection accounts then must be myth. Furthermore, if Jesus predicts an event that comes to pass decades after his death, the destruction of the Jewish temple in AD 70, for example, this must have been added after the event occurred, since prophecy, a kind of miraculous knowledge, is impossible. Since myths like this take time to develop, the Gospels must have been written late and could not be eyewitness accounts. One thing I'm going to note about Jesus' prediction of the destruction of the Jewish temple is that you really don't need, and this is a point brought up by Dr. Darrell Bach, you actually don't need a supernatural Jesus in order for him to predict that there's going to be a destruction later on in history. Okay. When Jesus was around, it was widely considered that the Jewish nation was living in covenantal unfaithfulness. And if you read Deuteronomy, you'll definitely see that if the nation is living in covenantal unfaithfulness, then there's going to be retribution. There's going to be a punishment. There's going to be destruction. So Jesus could be relying on. Jesus could just be relying on the curses established in the Pentateuch, and and then just to be saying that as a prediction that this is going to happen because we are living in covenantal unfaithfulness. All right, so this assumption that since Jesus got this right, that means that the Gospels must have been written after 70 AD, is not very strong. Not very strong, and this is a main reason why many scholars think that the Gospels were written so late, is because of this correct. This fulfilled prophecy. They don't really have any other, any better reasons. This is like their strongest reason, and it's very weak. All right, so since myths like this take time to develop, the Gospels must have been written later and could not have been eyewitness accounts. All right, so notice the significance of the starting point. When an academic begins with naturalism, a series of facts fall into place before any genuine historical analysis begins. The resurrection is invented. The miracles are myths. There is no prophecy in the Bible. The Gospels were written long after the events took place and not by eyewitnesses. Starting with one's conclusions, though, is cheating. Nothing has been proved. Everything has only been assumed. Using the Rhodes Scholar tactic, asking the scholar's reasons of not just their credentials, helps us flush out both the facts and the philosophy that may be corrupting the interpretation of the facts. This allows us to assess the scholar's opinion for ourselves rather than simply having to take his view on faith. One thing that I feel like I need to mention here is that there are many points of view, there are many positions that enjoy scholarly consensus, but the majority of those scholars only hold that position tentatively. So even if someone says that this position, that's like a non-Christian position, is enjoys scholarly consensus, that doesn't mean that it's solid. It means that these scholars just tentatively hold to it, and a lot of it has to do with like what Koukl's saying here, a worldview, their position on the world, their view of the world. Mighty Vina says, I have heard this historical Jesus argument before, and I can see why it is popular. If someone told me a corpse got up and started walking after 3 days, I would be pretty skeptical too. Yeah, you know, these, yeah, you should be. And you should be skeptical, especially if it's of a person who said that they were going to rise again after 3 days, you know. So the reason why, though, that people believe this is because of the conviction of the closest Jesus's followers. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that the disciples preached the word boldly to the point of being willing to suffer to suffer, like imprisonment and beatings and things of that nature, but also appear to be willing to suffer to the point of death, there's something going on here. You know, if one of my friends told me that he saw somebody rise from the dead, you know, and he was going to get killed for it, and he didn't repent or anything like that, and said that it was going to be the case, or that's what he saw. That's what he saw. There's nothing. I can't say that I didn't see it because I'd be lying or whatever. I'd be like, well, I believe him. Sasha says, scholarly articles are peer-reviewed, but always worth questioning. Yeah, yep. Just because something's peer-reviewed doesn't mean that it is definitive. You know, there are many peer-reviewed scholarly articles that contradict each other. You know, what people do is obtain data and then create hypotheses based off of the data, and they could be very different. You know, the data can be interpreted different ways. And what we need to do is we need to see the data ourselves, look at the reasons for why someone holds a position that they have, and then weigh them against each other. And something also that needs to be considered is pragmatic considerations. Christianity is not just some hypothesis with no consequences. You know, Jesus made it clear that there was eternal consequences for failing to be a part of his kingdom, you know? And so we need to understand that we're looking at contrary evidences and hypotheses and seeing if they are so strong that it's worth risking experiencing eternal suffering. You know, is this non-Christian hypothesis so strong that it's worth risking experiencing eternal suffering? So that's something that we need to keep into consideration. It's not enough to be an epistemically viable option. It's not enough to be historically plausible. It needs to be strong enough to risk actually experiencing suffering, a significant suffering. All right, so, all right, where was I? I forget where I was. So Koukl continues, notice the significance of the starting point when a academic begins with naturalism. A series of facts fall into place before any genuine historical analysis begins. The resurrection is an invention. Miracles are myths. There is no prophecy in the Bible. The Gospels were written long after the events took place and not by eyewitnesses. Starting with one's conclusions, though, is cheating. Nothing has been proved. Everything has only been assumed. Using the Rhodes Scholar tactic, asking the scholar's reasons, not just his credentials, helps us to flesh out both the facts and the philosophy that may be corrupting the interpretation of the facts. This allows us to assess the scholar's opinions for ourselves rather than simply having to take his view on faith. Remember, reasons are more important than votes. If the reason is bad, if the facts are false or the judgments are tainted by philosophical bias, it doesn't matter if multitudes share the same opinion. The view is still compromised. Not all bias is equal. Can the charge of bias be leveled at Christians? Certainly, and sometimes the charge is justified. Whenever someone has already taken sides on an issue, it is possible he has not been even-handed in his analysis. It is not fair, though, to assume someone has distorted the facts simply because he has a stake in the matter. People who are not neutral can still be fair and impartial. If you think there has been distorting bias, you have to demonstrate it by looking carefully at the evidence itself. A mom may think her high school daughter is brilliant. You might dismiss the claim as overly partial since her mom has a bias. But if the student maxed out her SATs, her mom also has a point. Clearly, not all forms of bias not all forms of bias distort. When a Christian deals with issues like science and history, it's fair to say he's biased in the sense that he brings certain assumptions to the process, just like everyone else. A Christian's bias, though, does not inform his conclusions the same way that biases inform the conclusions of scientists or historians, restricted by the commitment of materialism. The current bias of science is a bias that distorts in many cases because it illicitly eliminates certain answers before the game gets started. Many scientists and historians must come up with conclusions that leave a supernatural agent out of the picture, even when evidence points in that direction, because their philosophy demands it. A theist is not so encumbered. She believes in the laws of nature, but also is open to the possibility of supernatural intervention. Both are consistent with her worldview. She can judge the evidence on its own merits, unhindered by a philosophy that automatically eliminates divine intervention before giving the evidence an even-handed hearing. Ironically, the Christian's bias broadens her categories, making her more open-minded, not less. She has a greater chance of discovering truth because she can follow the evidence wherever it leads. That's a critical distinction. Can bias make a person open-minded? Under the right circumstances, absolutely. Ultimately, the issue isn't bias but distortion. It's unsound to say that because the gospel writers were Christian, their testimony cannot be trusted. Conversely, a non-believer's conclusion should not be dismissed because he is not among the faithful. In both cases, we have to look at the reasons themselves. This is the heart of Rhodes Scholar. All right, so what did we learn this chapter? The Rhodes Scholar tactic gives us a tool to use when someone invokes scholarly opinions against our view. It protects us from a common error called the fallacy of expert witness. On one hand, appealing to scholarly opinion is a legitimate way to make a point. Sometimes an expert is in a unique position to know the facts or to render a judgment. On the other hand, experts are not always right. Be on the lookout for appeals to scholarship that are misapplied. Sometimes authorities weigh in outside of their area of expertise. Other times they get their facts wrong. Often philosophical bias distort their judgment. The key to Rhodes Scholar is getting past the opinion of a scholar and probing the reasons for his opinion. This is the difference between being informed and being educated. Whether an alleged expert is offering facts or judgments, always ask for an accounting. How did he come to his conclusions? What are the facts specifically? Are there any biases that seem to be distorting the assessment? With the reasons on the table, you are in a better position to judge whether scholars' conclusions are sound. Don't be shaken by academic appeals. What an expert believes is not as important as why he believes it. Fancy credentials are not enough. What matters most are the reasons, not merely the opinions. All right, so we've reached the end of the chapter. And you know what that means? That means we get to celebrate. Woohoo! Yeah, baby. Yes, indeed. Yeah, good job, everyone. Thank you for being with me to the end of this chapter. I hope that you got something out of it. I thought it was a really good chapter, really important stuff being talked about here. Something in here I wanted to mention. All right, so Other times they get their facts wrong. Often philosophers' bias distort their judgment. The key to Rhodes Scholar is getting the best opinion and probing the reasons for his opinion. Something that I discovered when I was in nuclear chemistry is that degrees and diplomas are overrated. They are overrated. There's a lot of people that had master's degrees in chemistry, even nuclear chemistry, and PhDs, and they didn't know as much as you would expect them to. And so I actually, when I was working in nuclear power, I had been screwed over more than a couple times by someone with a degree. So make sure you definitely want to become familiar with this information yourself, and also looking at the reasons yourself. And like I said earlier, just because there is a scholarly consensus does not mean that it's held strongly by the scholars. Make sure that you're doing your homework, making sure that you have a justified, true belief as best as you can as a human being. Like I said, I really appreciate you guys coming out, and don't forget to come out next week for our book study. We're going to be doing chapter 16, and the chapter 16 is called Just the Facts, Ma'am. Just the Facts, Ma'am. And if I remember correctly, this is going to be Koukl telling us that we need to figure out when we're talking about somebody's opinions versus what really is the case. Okay, so he'll give us ways to go about addressing that kind of stuff. All right, so see you guys next Monday at 6 p.m. Thank you, and God bless. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Bye-bye.
Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.